What is up, my loves? I am Justina Victoria. I am a psychosexual expert for men and couples. And if you are new here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to be chatting about the freeze response. What is the freeze response and how to heal and downregulate our stress response when we're in freeze? So stick around. Okay, so what is the freeze response? I love talking about freeze. It used to be like one of my most hated states outside of the overload states of panic and dissociation. Freeze was always something that really irritated me because we call it functional freeze. And that's because we can function as human beings. Like we're not extremely altered. We're not extremely outside or deviated from our baseline. Meaning when we're really high in sympathetic fight or flight, we can feel really altered, right? Like we feel really shaky or sped up or like, oh, I want to get back to safety or this thing is stressing me out and I just like don't want to deal with this anymore. And in dorsal, right? Same thing where there's a big deviation. We could be stuck in bed and self-isolating and not taking care of ourselves and etc. But in freeze is interesting because we're still getting energy into the system. We're still getting up, we're still going to work. We're still trying to get our shit done that we're supposed to get done and our to-do lists and all that stuff. But a lot of people are in this chronic functional freeze state. And this is where we have both sympathetic and dorsal online at the same time. And we have two versions or two flavors, if you will, of freeze. One is the pleasing state, and one is the freezing state. So the pleasing state is our sympathetic dominant freeze. This is where sympathetic is in the driver's seat and dorsal is in the passenger seat. And the freezing state is where we have a dorsal dominant freeze. Dorsal is in the driver's seat and sympathetic is in the passenger seat. And as you know from some of my previous videos or a little bit about the nervous system, sympathetic is a mobilization of energy and dorsal is an immobilization of energy. So when they both come online, they can sort of create this feeling of like lack of flow in the system. And if sympathetic is in the driver's seat, we're going to have a little bit more energy. And if dorsal is in the driver's seat, we're going to have a little bit less energy. So in sympathetic dominant freeze, or the state that we call pleasing, this state is really characterized by a lot of like perfectionism. I call this state the state where our soul leaves our body and is very concerned about someone or something else, or even tries to enter into someone else's body, right? Mind read what they need and, just like figure out whatever I can do to like, maintain this attachment to this person, etc. Right? Or it can be in a work sense, right? We could be at work and we could be so taxed by our work and so stressed by what we need to get done that we literally leave our body. We cannot even sense when we're hungry. We cannot sense when we're thirsty. We can't sense when we need a break and it's time to rest. We're gone. And then we come back at the end of the day and we're like, holy shit, there's a dumpster fire happening in my body, right? Just like, ooh. I guess I'll go home and have a glass of wine or something. So freeze, the sympathetic dominant freeze is very much about obligation and have tos and shoulds and I really need to be doing this and to-do lists and like, I have to be perfect and I have to get this right. And, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing a good enough job. I have to do better, etc. The dorsal dominant freeze state is the state that I call square peg in the round hole. This is where we just feel stuck and like we can't get momentum. I call this the state of like driving the car with the emergency brake on, right? Like the hand brake is on and you're moving, right? Like you are moving, but it's like something, there's this invisible barrier and you want to like rip all your hair out of your head. And this is what I love about this state, is that this is the state of procrastination, distraction, and addiction. So if you've ever struggled with addiction or you've ever known anybody who struggled with addiction, their nervous system was in a dorsal dominant freeze state. This is the only state where we experience addiction. There's a range in this state as well, where we're just looking for approval. Like we could just be like approval seeking all the way up to self-harm. And that's because we're just desperate to get flow into the system. We're desperate to get some kind of stimulation, right? We could feel very bored in the state, very flat in this state. And this is the state where you see people cutting themselves or plucking their eyebrows and their eyelashes out, like doing these bizarre behaviors that you're like, why are they doing this? Or maybe you've done this in the past and you're like, I don't know why I do stuff like this, right? You see the birds that are in a cage that pluck all of their own feathers out, right? Or you may be on your phone just like mindlessly scrolling for like an hour, just binge watching TV, unable to move, right? And that is because we're stuck in the freeze state, dorsal dominant freeze state. Okay, there's a really not a lot of flow coming into the system, and we're trying to get some stimulation. We're trying to get the system to flow again, but it's stuck. Okay, so we feel a lot of paralysis. We feel a lot of criticism for ourselves, self-judgment, feeling like we are failures, like we're just not good enough as we are and who we are. And we're pretty much desperate to kind of remedy those feelings by drinking, smoking, playing video games, scrolling, self-harm, whatever it is. We're just trying to feel something. We're trying to get that stimulation back. And so this is what I want to share with you, which I think is one of the most amazing and important things that I share with my clients is every state of the nervous system is a room. And in that room, only certain things that are equal to that state can exist. So if you're in sympathetic dominant freeze, then we know there's going to be a tendency for perfectionism and people pleasing and feeling obligated, etc., right? And if you're in the sympathetic dominant freeze, the pleasing room, you're only going to find those things. You're not going to find things that exist in ventral, like flow and play and laughter and fun and creativity and connection. It doesn't exist in that room. And so typically what happens when we go into either one of these freeze states is we rummage through this room, flip the mattress over, pull the drawers out, and we're looking for the flow. We're like, where is the flow? Where is the feeling good? Where's the feeling normal and balanced and like myself? But it doesn't exist in that room. So this is why the states of the dysregulation states are self-feeding, because the more we rummage through this room looking for the things that don't exist in there and not finding them, the more frozen we become, the more frustrated we become, right? And then we try harder, we look harder. Or maybe it's under the bed, or maybe it's behind the TV, or maybe it's in the closet. And we look harder, try harder, right? And we're still not getting that flow. So how do we remedy the freeze state? How is it different from the other states? So in sympathetic, what we're doing is we're typically down-regulating through proactive rest. So in sympathetic, you're going to feel really sped up and urgent and problem solving, etc. And most people feel like they need to go to the gym and go for a run and punch a punching bag and get all this energy out. But in fact, what we have to do is bring the energy down. And we do that through breathing and, meditation and warm substances, drinking warm tea, taking a warm bath, going in the sauna, bring that energy down. In contrast, in dorsal, we're going to feel like we want to lay in bed all day and not take any action and give up and self-isolate. And what we have to do is the opposite. We have to inject a bit of energy into the system. So cold liquids, right? Cold shower, cold water. We want to get up. We want to move the body and have gentle movement, etc., in order to get the system flowing again. But in freeze, this is what's really interesting, is when you go into freeze, you're kind of using all these things. You're like, okay, got my resource list. What about the sauna? And what about if I go for a run? Or what if I meditate? What if I just rest? What if right? You're doing all these things, but doesn't seem to change the freeze state. And what I have found is that the freeze state is less about trying to resource the state and finding sort of like a cure for it. It's less about having an unmet need, though it can still be an unmet need that's causing this. But I find that it's typically a narrative. And this is one that I gave to my client today, as we work through his freeze and start to peel layers of that away so that he can come back to naturalness and flow. I told him, if you were running from a lion and you ran into a cave and the lion couldn't get into the cave, so you were technically safe inside the cave, but the lion was sitting outside of the cave. So in essence, you're safe, but you can't leave to get food, you can't get water, and you can't technically get back to actual safety because the lion is standing in the way, right? The lion is still there. So while you're safe in the cave, you're not really safe in the cave, right? Now, if you take that scenario and you internalize it, that is what the freeze state is. We have a narrative that's telling us that we're not safe, that we don't have any good option to get out of the situation that we feel we're in. And we're just kind of stuck. And this narrative is tripping the nervous system because, again, the nervous system only has 4 tools: run, fight, freeze, and play dead. If those 4 tools cannot resolve whatever the issue is, it's going to keep trying, but eventually it's just going to get kind of stuck of like, it doesn't really know what to do. So a good example, like a real world example of this would be like, if you are, let's say, in a relationship or you're married and you're really deeply unhappy in the relationship, but you also know that if you leave the relationship, you'll be really, really unhappy as well. So you have this sort of chronic dysregulation, but there's no resolution for it, right? Both of the options that you have will essentially cause you to feel dysregulation, right? So that is what a freeze state really is. It's like we don't have a solution for the perceived problem. Or the options that we do have for the perceived problem are going to continue to cause us to be dysregulated. Whereas if we're in the cave, right, and there's a lion outside, we don't have any option. Like, we can't stay in the cave indefinitely because there's no food and water. We can't leave the cave because the lion's out there and we're just kind of stuck in this space. But if the lion left and we ran out of the cave back to safety, we'd downregulate our stress response and we'd come back to a ventral state. If that's not an option, right, then we stay stuck in freeze. So the way that we deal with freeze and the way that we heal the freeze response is to look at the narratives that are creating the freeze response, right? So some of those narratives can be like, I'm not doing enough. I need to try harder. I haven't achieved enough. I need to do X, Y, Z in order to preserve my attachment, in order to preserve my job. My client had one that was like, time is very limited and like life is very short and I have to like make the most of it. And while that's like a good sentiment, right? It's like, yeah, you don't want to like waste your life. You want to like really achieve things and get to the end of your life and feel really proud of what you've accomplished. That narrative was tripping his nervous system because it was just too much pressure. But once we flipped it and I was like, okay, so you have 2,000 years to live. Then what? And he was like, oh, okay, like I feel good. You see the flow immediately come through his system, just at the thought of that, right? Because the other thought is the same. It's like, oh, whether you think you have limited time and you have to hurry up and cram everything in, or you have an idea that's like, life is long and I have so much time and I'm going to experience everything I want to experience in this life before it's up. And once it's time for me to go, I'm going to be ready. I'm going to live 100 years, but it's going to feel like 1,000. And it's going to be 1,000 of the most amazing years ever. That's a totally different narrative. And the nervous system is going to relate to that narrative in a completely different way. So I found that one of the best ways to heal from the freeze response is to look at the underlying narratives that keep tripping the system into sympathetic and dorsal at the same time, that we're perceiving as a problem that is unsolvable, and it only has options that continue to create chronic dysregulation. Once you find those narratives, you start to heal them. You start to collect evidence for why they're not true and create a new story that actually creates flow in the nervous system. So I hope this was helpful. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one.